Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Down to Business. Today we're going to cover a topic that should be in every business, I believe, around budgeting. Joining me is David Jamieson. Welcome, Dave. Dave's a partner and looks after a lot of businesses from small to medium to large within the PKF business and more specifically the business advisory services business. So, I'd hope quite versed on this topic that we're going to be covering off on. So Dave, welcome, as I said, and
thank you.
You get involved a fair bit in this topic of budgeting, don't you?
Yeah, it's near to my heartbeat.
Yeah. So I guess talk to me about because a lot of people would, interpret budgeting to have many different meanings.
Yeah.
When we're talking budgeting in this sense, what is budgeting, and more specifically, what is budgeting within business?
Yeah, a good question. So, a budget is almost a financial plan for a business or the plan for the year ahead in numbers. Sometimes it might be more than a year ahead. And it's important to note that it's not actually a forecast. A forecast is very different. That's probably a realistic projection of where you think you're going to end up as you go through the year. A budget is much more about setting targets that are meaningful for a business and therefore setting a bit of an ambition for where the business wants to get to.
Yeah, because we've spoken in previous videos and when we talk strategy, it doesn't matter what business we're talking about, they've all got resources and limited resources at that.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine budgeting is a bit more about maximising your allocation to achieve some of these objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. You've only got so much to work with, so you've got to kind of pick your mark and then really run with it. So budgeting is just a brilliant opportunity to sit down and think about the business of your choice.
Yeah. Okay, so who's it for more specifically, I guess, from stakeholders, but for me, I opened up with saying I believe budgeting is for everyone. I really do, especially in a business sense. But a lot of people don't think that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. We see all sorts of people assume they don't need a budget or that the budget's not particularly interesting to them, and I respectfully disagree with that. So, for instance, one of the biggest misunderstandings in a lot of businesses is that they think it's only for the finance people and that they're the only ones who are going to get anything out of it. The bean counters, that's right. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The budget needs to affect the fibre of the business from the very grassroots right up to the top, and everyone should be really interested, in my view, in setting it. When I see businesses do that and have the respect for the budgeting function, I see successful years ahead, and it just flows. Once you've got a number and a target in mind that makes sense, that's achievable, that's doable, people really step up to the mark and start to perform at that level. So very powerful thing if used the right way and given the right respect.
Yeah. I guess if we're going to summarise that, budgeting helps not only set goals but navigate to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you're small, you're large, you're black, you're yellow, you're white, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's that roadmap, as you say, or that financial plan. So it makes sense that if you're in business, you need a budget. That's
it. Yeah, and you say small or large, and that's another assumption that, I'm too small to worry about it. I'm just going to get out there and see what happens. Again, I see that go astray. The more powerful thing to do is to go, right, where am I headed?
Okay, good. So we started to touch on, it applies to everyone, but so if we focus then on the business and who would use the budget, tell me, in your experience, who is the budget for, especially who utilises it well in some of those more better outcomes that you're seeing?
Yeah, there's a few different levels. I mean, obviously the leadership from the very top down need to utilise the budget and understand their part in delivering that. But just as importantly, if you're big enough to have a bit of a management crew, they need to have participated in building the budget and then be really committed to delivering that as well. So often the budget can be used by operational managers in the business just as much as the leaders or the finance people. Absolutely, the finance team needs to then play a role in controlling costs and things like that, but it's not just them. That's my main point.
Yeah, because I guess, you can get financial reporting, but really that's looking backwards.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, a budget can be good for performance, yeah.
Yep.
But you're a lot more about, going forward. And I guess one of the things I always got told coming through the ranks, and I still live by today, that cash is king.
Yeah, that's it. Cash is always king. And I'm glad you touched on that, because people fall for the mistake also of thinking, oh, I've targeted a certain profit, therefore I have a budget. No, you don't. If you haven't looked at what that profit needs to communicate with a balance sheet and where your assets and liabilities will fall through the year, and then go the next step and translate that to how is your cash flow going to be through the year. If you haven't gone all the way looking at that, you could still end up in a lot of trouble. And I've had clients come to me with a massive targeted profit, and I've had to deliver some bad news that no, it actually even needs to be more to be able to sustain the cash flow requirements of the business through that year. So you run out of cash, a perfectly profitable business can go bust. It's just a sad fact.
So sorry, I digressed a bit there. You talked about your management team. So obviously the people I mentioned are business owners.
Yes,
they should live and breathe by this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The management team, if you're of that size where you have key people in different positions,
yeah.
Who else would be using a budget?
Yeah, well, as I said, management, absolutely. But there's a whole raft of people who might be very interested in your budget once you've set it. And it starts with your bank manager, for instance, or applying for finance and, getting some leverage in your business.
Which especially at the moment, it's very tough for people having to jump through the reforms going on in banking and off the back of COVID and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And I have to say, I see the bankers' eyes light up every time I see. I tell them that there's going to be a budget that's put in front of them that's meaningful, sensible, and well thought through.
Well, it makes their job easier, doesn't it?
Exactly. It helps everyone. But a bunch of employees might be interested in your budget as well. Their incentive programs might be sensibly set on whatever falls out of the budget and the targets that you're then going for the business to be the size and shape that it needs to be. Creditors, people you're dealing with in business might need to look at the budget. There's a whole heap of people all around you, all sorts of stakeholders who are going to be quite interested in the fact that you've got a budget and that you've got serious targets that you're going for.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of the other ones, just come to mind in my experience is, investors potentially, depending where you're at in your business life, or even ultimately if you want to exit, we do a lot with businesses looking to transition or do a trade sale. Well, it's much easier to sell a story with good forecasting and showing how you actually run this business than, putting it out there to the masses and see what happens.
That's dead right. And I mean, a lot of people use forecasts as part of their valuation suite of tools. It's not just what you've done historically that will determine the value of your business. If you've got a sensible budget there, it often comes into play.
Now, I'll throw this one. I mean, I know how you operate in your business that you don't have too many clients that don't have a budget, to be fair, and I think that's a great position to be in. I get why after what you just told us, but I think the thing to allude to for most business owners, it's not a coincidence that having a budget generally leads to more structure, clarity, and results.
Yeah, that's true. That's dead true. So at the end of the day, I think people who've chosen to plan ahead like that then have to turn their mind to what size and shape is this business going to be. And we always really take in a huge amount of enjoyment in playing the role of asking them that question, and in a really big context. It's like, what's the end game here? Where does this business head? What's the sale value in 5 years' time? Or are you going to just grow this so that it's a nice passive income stream for you for many years to come? Whatever the answers are to those big questions then really determines what your budget is going to be for this year. And so, I think it can really generate some interesting conversations with business owners.
So I'm guessing my next question is really around some of the biggest mistakes you see. So I guess the first one you've already said about not having a budget, full stop. Yeah. But let's expand on that. What are some of the mistakes you've seen in all your times of practicing around the budgeting, full stop?
Yeah. So building on that, not having a budget, you might think you're too small. And again, we've debunked that one. It doesn't matter how small you are. It might be a simple budget, but you definitely, what's the saying? If you've got no goals, then you'll hit them with remarkable accuracy. Yeah. So, that's just a case no matter how big, small, or what stage of the business life cycle you're in. But also some businesses are so established and so steady that I've seen them make the mistake of thinking, oh, we don't need a budget, we'll just see where we land this year. And again, like tying back to that cash is king comment that you made before, that can really land you in trouble. If you don't understand the peaks and troughs and how the year is likely to track out, even in a relatively steady year, and then maybe even test the fortitude of the budget and go, well, if we were 5% down in that month, where would that land? Even steady businesses find that it's a really important process to go to. And also the thing that I love to challenge a steady business on is, well, could you be better? What could you change? Let's use this as an opportunity to really challenge the status quo and generate something different. But if we're thinking about other sort of big mistakes that I see people making, I think it's about not having the right serious conversation up front. That's a huge one. And that involves, again, we've alluded to it before, all levels of the organisation. So if managers, sales managers are going to be responsible for delivering a result that contributes to you achieving the budget as a business, then the sales managers need to buy into the process. They need to be on board, keen, committed, perhaps even incentivised in line with the budget that's been set.
Obviously, that would also, require feedback both ways. So
that's it.
Not just yes people, but making this part of your process to get something that actually is bought into, but quite robust in its in how it's brought together.
Now, it's funny you say that. Like, the worst thing you could have in an organisation is people who aren't prepared to share their truth. Somebody to say, oh yes, and in their mind they're thinking, no way. That's a sure setup for failure. So a really honest conversation around what's possible. And if they don't think it's possible, why? What could we change? What could we do differently? Like, really open people's minds. So that's one of the biggest mistakes, not going there, not having that, and not involving the right people. And the other one is just the classic. People think they've set a budget by just taking last year's actual result and then upping it by 5% or 10%.
5%. And realistically, and the 5%, you think, CPI and a bit of a price increase passed on by suppliers, you could trip over that. So it's, And I think furthermore, when to your point where it needs to be bought into and the why, that then needs to link back to your strategy as well as to what you're trying to achieve.
That's it.
Yeah. So realistically, then this is sort of a pre-financial year completion, ready for the next year.
Yeah.
This is a key planning measure.
Yeah, that's it. It's your chance to sit down and really think about your business. Who wouldn't love that? So you can start to see why I'm passionate about it, Beats.
And what about some of the other things I know I've seen before with, people think, I've got a budget in, not to pick on the brands, but say a Xero or a MyOb or some of these, I guess, accounting-based tools, which they're a bit more, let's call it static than dynamic, and we need the latter for the decision making.
Yeah, that is true. Hey, it's better than nothing, but at the end of the day, just having a profit and loss forecast in there is not the same thing as having a proper, what we call a three-way budget, where you've also projected forward what your balance sheet shape will look like, and most importantly, what your cash flows will be through the year, and where your pain points are, and what you need to do to get ready for those hard times of the year.
Yeah, so I guess not to go into, a system overview here, but make sure the message there is you've got the appropriate tools, which I might add, this day and age with technology changes, doesn't have to mean expensive either, to give you what you're after.
We actually work with a tool called Castaway, and we just love it. It works really quite well. And in that three-stage process that I'm talking about, and it's Excel-based, it's quite simple in some ways for us to use, but what spills out of it is pure gold. And as I say, bank managers and everyone in between love it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's break down some of the myths. We've spoken about some of the biggest mistakes. What are some of the more common myths around having a budget? I think you've already mentioned the one that I'm too small, so we might jump on past that.
Yeah, well, probably I would say the one that having a target profit is enough. Like, as long as you've got a profit in mind, that means you've got a good budget and that you'll have a successful year. That's where I've seen businesses come majorly unstuck, because, as I said before, I've seen some quite big profits targeted and aggressive profits targeted, but because of the growth that's required to get into that, and without getting too technical with it, the reality is there's going to need to be a big investment of working capital and an injection of cash or something to actually get the business to delivering that. So if you don't understand that full picture, then it's a myth that this profit and having a big profit is good enough. And the other thing there is that your profit may not be delivering what the business needs. It might be that a smaller profit, but more realistically and efficiently delivered, is the right thing for the business in that year. you never know until you've stopped and thought about it. But yeah, I think we've covered most of the myths there. Often too small, and you don't need a budget. That's a myth, and that that a budget is just a profit forecast.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'd add to that also is around, and I touched on it before, is it's costly. Reality is, a budget is not what tool you're using. It could be, as you said before, it could be written down on a piece of paper. Yeah, it might take a bit more administration, a bit more labour to keep it up to date.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be an expensive process. It's more about having a view on where you're going and constantly checking that back in.
Yeah.
Ideally with your team.
Yeah.
To get that result. Yeah. So, like realistically, when we talk about this sort of stuff from a business owner's point of view, there's less and less, let's call it excuses or reasons as to why they can't have a budget and therefore can't have, a bit of accountability and direction around their results.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And a good advisor is always going to be sitting there and helping businesses make that decision about, okay, well, we probably don't need the Rolls Royce here, but let's get something in place that's really usable and useful.
And can evolve over time.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
All right, so we've spoken a lot about the need for budgeting, taking away a lot of debunk some of the myths there and some of the mistakes you see. Tell me, in your opinion, what's the right way of attacking budgeting?
That's the best question. So at the end of the day, the right way is to start with the end in mind. That's really important.
What do you mean by the end in mind?
Yeah, well, for us, that means what size and shape does this business need to be to deliver the future of choice to the owners or the people who are benefiting from it? And that's a big question, and there can be a lot of answers. And so often we find that business owners haven't stopped and thought about what is the size and shape, or they don't know, or they just think that the biggest possible is the best. And they may not be the answers. So once we understand the answer to that question, then we can go about, setting up a budget the right way, I think. So then you ask different questions. And again, I said before, you don't start with last year and add 10% or 5%. That's not going to get you to where you need to be. Once you understand what the true size and shape of the business needs to be in 1, 2, 5, 10 years, then you can sit down and say, well, okay, what is that 1 year looking like? What do I need to achieve? And then we always recommend, rather than starting from the top down in terms of the profit and loss statement, so starting with sales and then maybe looking at your purchases, we like to start from the bottom up. And that means starting and looking at the expenses that you have to incur that are locked in, that you can't do much about. Sure, challenging who the providers are and having a good discussion with all sorts of people in the business and out of the business about what you might be able to do about that. But at the end of the day, you have these overheads, we call them, that basically are fixed and you can't do much about them. So start with those and understand then what you need to cover to keep the doors open. That's important. And then go for size and shape of the business this year. And then what does that mean for the years ahead and delivering the future of choice for the business owners? So that's how I really like to promote it being done. As I said before, I really like it to be a discussion. It's the point to pause, consider, reflect, talk to all sorts of people, including ourselves as advisors. We can really challenge the status quo and use our experience with all sorts of other businesses to bring something fresh to the table, or just ask that good question, why?
Or the hard question.
Yeah.
I think the thing I love about that is that independence factor, that, the part that, I don't have to work with you tomorrow, so I don't have to worry about, asking that tough question that other people might find upset you. Because realistically, it's your chance to go, oh, I didn't think of that, or look at it through a different set of eyes to maybe get a better outcome than you previously achieved.
Yeah. And so, having that as a conversation is important. Also, in terms of the right approach, don't start it too late. Don't get to 1 July and start setting it. Start this process in May or June of the year before, if that's your financial year or your cycle that you like to work to. Because again, as I said before, it's about respecting the process and doing it properly. If you're going to do this, you may as well get a good result.
And I'd imagine likewise, even if you've missed that, we're sitting here now in nearly end of September. People have gone, well, I haven't got one, I need to start. Well, start now.
Yeah, that's it.
That's one of the biggest things I remember. Start now, align it then next year to your financial year, but just get started. Because as you go, you can start to learn a lot of this, sort of help you improve your budgeting in the future also.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, so tell me some of your your war stories, I guess. Like I recall there was a function across the road here at Newcastle, and I believe one of your clients are in a business of blinds or curtains or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember they came to you, at their wits' end, in tears and that sort of stuff. And I believe budgeting was a pretty key part in that.
Yeah, it was. And that's a really good story of how this can help a business. When they came to us, they were really struggling, particularly around the Christmas period, because their business would close down. And therefore, they were still having to pay the wage bills and everything else. However, there was no money coming in the door. And they would find themselves really caught out around that time of year, to the extent where it was life-threatening to the business. So you can imagine, pretty emotional, a pretty big thing to have to get past. And where budgeting helped them, and these business owners, they're my favourite kind of business owners, because once they decide to do something, they execute. And so with that attitude, they sat down and started getting some targets, doing exactly what we've talked about, making sure that they're forecasting not just the profit, but the balance sheet and the cash flow as well. And that cash flow around that December-January period was particularly important. And so one of the best moments in my experience with that client was when they came to me in February, I think the second year we'd been working with them, and they said, "We've never had a Christmas like it. We didn't have to worry. There was cash in the bank. We got through." But interestingly, on that client too, they've also used the budgeting process to grow their business beyond what they thought was even reasonable, because we had that discussion. What is the business of choice that you're choosing here? Where do you want it to go? And when they decided that, we all had that kind of aha moment of, we have to go a bit harder. We need more aggressive targets, bigger revenues than we thought was possible. We just redefined what a big month looks like for them. And while that might sound hard or intimidating to a business owner at the start, as I say, they just go for it, they execute, and they're really crushing it. So that's a great war story. I love that one. There's always ones that, are lessons to all of us as well. But that's a real shining example of how this can help.
So what are some of the others that you've come across, good or bad?
Yeah, well, probably on the not so good spectrum of things is a particular client that I've worked with over time that initially wasn't involving their management team in the budget setting process, and had a lot of that yes man mentality that we talked about. And so what that meant was we just had the same targets as last year. We had employees who were getting incentivized for basically just showing up to do their job. And so what we saw there was a real lull. And I guess this story does have a good ending too, because they've managed to turn that around with some guidance and some fresh thinking. But at the end of the day, what they experienced was a real lull in performance of the business from people who were not incentivized to really stretch themselves or think differently, and they're still feeling like they were delivering what was asked of them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I imagine, once you start to get into this, and it's not all about just growth too. The budgeting can help you to look and go, well, maybe I've got some clients or customers, etc., that maybe aren't good for our business, or maybe, we're carrying too many costs that we need to pull back, therefore put less pressure on the revenue needs, etc.
Yeah.
But, having that framework and that consideration obviously starts that conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. And probably really final point for me that, and advice for any listener or viewer, it's horses for courses. There's no one size fits all here, is there?
Yeah, I agree. And so if you go to get some help on a budget and somebody says, "Oh, here's the way to do it and the way I always do it," be very wary of that. Every business is a unique beast and needs its own flavour, it needs its own approach. And so we talked about it before. It might be a very simple approach that's very effective for you, and you don't need to overwork it. Or it might be a really big process involving a lot of discussions and a lot of planning and forethought, and using it for multiple layers in strategy and business. Whichever way you go, definitely not one size fits all, and definitely, pick your mark and understand why you're doing the process. Yeah.
And with that, I think the one thing that does apply to all, ideally, is timeliness, because a lot of the things that you've pointed out that a budget can tell you, you want to know sooner rather than later. So if you have to address it or take advantage of it, it's there. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they're good points.
And the other thing I would say is people can be a bit hard on themselves once the budget's set and they may not achieve it, or their result may be different. My attitude towards that is always to have an open mind. It may be that the budget was wrong. People's crystal ball is never accurate. But it might also be that something's happened and this gives us really good information about what's going on in the business and what we need to focus on. So even a budget variance is not something to beat yourself or any of your team up over. It's something to learn. It's a real opportunity. It's a shining a light on where the business needs to look.
Yeah, good. Oh, I mean, so we've certainly got a lot of information about budgeting. Anything to add to close out that we haven't covered?
Oh, look, it's just the same message. It's like you need a budget, so deal with that. What form and how complex that budget is, that might be open for discussion and consideration. But yeah, I think that it's a vital part and a really exciting part of the business planning process. Get involved.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think, for any viewer, it absolutely, if you haven't got a budget, the clear message is something's better than nothing. Obviously, it evolves over time and get support where you require. But hopefully that gives you a fair bit of context and a bit of guidance as to how to improve your business. So until next time, cheers.